Price is Right game show, the little guy climbing the mountain yodeling. In June of '06, the housing bubble bursts in Arizona, and you can see it in real time. It's amazing. The little guy falls off the end of the mountain, and he crashes pretty hard and fast. In January of 2007, now mind you, this is when I become treasurer. I take the treasurer's office. We're creating this chart for the very first time. That month's number, negative 5.3%. First time it had been negative since the dot-com bubble and the 91-92 recession. I said, whoa, we've got a slowdown. I didn't want to pull out the R word until I had 2 months worth of data. And then February's number is negative 20%. This is the reason why in February of 2007, I actually started calling this a recession. And we beat a lot of economists to this forecast. Because it's kind of like predicting the weather. Imagine if you had to predict the weather, but you could only look at what the weather was like 3 months ago. It'd be a little difficult. This is the equivalent of being able to look out the window. It's going to obviously improve your forecasting ability. You know, and so that's effectively what we were doing in this process. And so, unfortunately, they didn't listen. In January of 2007, the state of Arizona had $2.4 billion cash in the bank. But they didn't listen to our warnings. They grew spending that next fiscal year by 10.5%. Revenues dropped by 9%. So you had a 20% spread between reality and what they were doing. We had balanced budgets before that. This is where the wheels came off. So the next year, now that $2.4 billion cash in the bank has fallen to $1.8 billion cash. You would think burning through $750 million in cash might set off some warning flags or, you know, red lights or sirens or something. It didn't. And so now we're looking at that $1.8 billion. I'm looking at what's going on in the economy, and I predicted that revenues were going to fall another 13.66%. That was my forecast. But that one, at the rate the state was spending, that $1.8 billion wasn't going to last. The state would literally spend every dime of that $1.8 billion and be out of money by April 15th of 2009, which is kind of ironic. You'd think that'd be the one day the state would have cash in the bank. Well, that's the forecast that the governor called me Chicken Little for. Said the sky, you know, he's saying, you know, he's predicting the sky is falling. I have money he doesn't even know about. I said, oh, really? That's a felony. You're not allowed to keep secrets from the treasurer when it comes to money. She backed away from that argument. But still, they ignored the warnings. They did not heed the warnings. They actually grew. Remember, 10.5% growth in operating liabilities of the state the year before. They compounded that by another 6.61% the next year. The thing about it was, I was wrong about revenues. I admit it. I was wrong when it came to revenue forecasting. The revenues did not fall 13.66% like I predicted. They actually fell closer to 20%. Now you know, Chicken Little was an optimist. I was too optimistic in my forecast. So you had a 20% drop in revenue and an increase of another 6.61. That wiped out all the savings of the state and nearly maxed out the credit cards. Problem is, we're not done yet. Now you roll in, now you've got to change administration. Napolitano goes off to D.C., and I feel so much safer about that. I don't know about you. Because I'm on the no-fly list, so I know I'm not going to be on the plane. Yeah, they put me on the no-fly list when she got back there. Why in the world am I on the no-fly list and some guy from Nigeria isn't? I haven't figured that one out. So Napolitano's back there. We get the new governor in, and the new governor, she's now pushing the tax increase. She wants this temporary sales tax increase. Legislature doesn't have the votes for it. So they pass a balanced budget without it. The governor sues them to force them to send the budget up so she can veto it, which they do. She vetoes it. So we have no balanced budget. We still don't have a balanced budget for this year. We're almost 3/4 of the way through the fiscal year. We still don't have a balanced budget. So they pass another budget, and finally they pass a budget in September, 3 months into the fiscal year. How many of you noticed that the value of your home dropped, but your tax bill went up? You've ever wondered why that happened? Well, I can tell you why. You've heard how the Bush tax cuts on the federal level, if they're not reauthorized, they automatically come back and it's an automatic tax increase. We basically had a similar type of thing for property taxes at the state. We had a $250 million property tax that if it wasn't reauthorized would automatically come back in. You'd have a thank you. You'd have a $250 million increase in property taxes. Well, the legislature passed it not once, not twice, but 3 times to continue this, to prevent this property tax increase from occurring. Governor Napolitano and Governor Brewer both vetoed it. Napolitano once, Brewer vetoed it twice. The last time was in September. You may have noticed your tax bills were delayed. They didn't come in on time. It was because they were holding the bills waiting to see whether she would sign or veto. They couldn't print them until she made her decision. And they waited till the last possible, actually they went past the last possible second on the bills. And it actually cost the county some money because they missed their window for cheap printing. They had to get them rush printed. Actually cost them a little extra money. So that's why you saw your property tax bill go up. But that wasn't the only line item veto that occurred. The governor also line item vetoed spending reductions that spent the $250 plus another $483 million on top of that. So actually widened the deficit. And that resulted in October being the second most expensive October in the history of the state of Arizona. November, the most expensive November in the history of the state. October missed being the most expensive by just a couple $1 million. So November was the most expensive month in state history. So remember how I talked about we started off with $2.4 billion, we ended up $1.8 billion the next year. We ran out of money on April 15th as I predicted. But because of the fact that they continued to spend millions of dollars a day more than we make, that number kept getting more and more negative. Now, as treasurer, I can lend the state about $500 million. That's the amount of money I have in other funds that I can lend the state without causing disruption in those other funds. Beyond that, we couldn't lend the general fund anymore. So we had to go out, and in August, we went out to bid to see if we could get a line of credit for the state to keep the lights on, make sure checks didn't bounce like California. The winning bid gave us a $700 million line of credit. We signed that the week of Thanksgiving. The state maxed it out the next week. In fact, the state was so we have a total of $1.2 billion that we can lend the state of Arizona to keep the lights on. If the state, now I don't know if you heard about this or not, but the state actually ended up having to sell the Capitol and a bunch of other state buildings to keep checks from bouncing in February. They actually sold the Capitol. We're the only state in the nation that does not own its Capitol building. We're actually renting our own Capitol. And they sold a bunch of other states. Buildings, $735 million is what they collected. That brought the state back in the black for 5 days. The state of Arizona is back in the red 5 days after the sale of the buildings. And in fact, right now, the state of Arizona is $686 million in the red. Now, the question I get a lot is my refund going to be any good? I get that question a lot. Yes, because they sold the buildings, and that went from 904 in the red, brought it, and then you had some collections, revenue collections that came in, plus the sale of the buildings, brought us back to positive for a couple days, then we're back to negative. That $696 million that we're in the red is obviously less than $1.2 billion. So we've got another 500 that we can basically borrow. We're going to basically borrow the money to make sure your refund checks are good. That's basically where the state is right now, is borrowing that money to do these things. One of the problems that we run into, though, is they're still spending more than we make. So one of the things they're doing right now in their budget process is they're doing something called a rollover. Rather than reducing spending, they're going to, if you're familiar with the old Popeye, Wimpy, I'll pay you Tuesday for